I never thought that after losing my husband, I would be happy again, alive again. If this feeling is familiar, I never expected her to say those words. I was sweating, my hands tight on the handle of the mower, the hum of the engine still in my ears when she stepped out onto the porch and called out to me, "Why don't you come inside after work?" Her voice was casual, but there was something in the way she looked at me that made the ground shift under my feet. It wasn't the kind of invitation you could mistake for neighborly politeness. No, it felt heavier, charged, like the air before a storm. And just like that, I forgot about the grass, the sun beating down on my back, and even the mower still rattling at my side. Let me back up. My name is Noah Carter. I'm 38, divorced for 2 years, and the kind of guy who works more than he probably should. My house sits across from hers. I'd been mowing my own lawn one weekend when she came out. Her blonde hair catching the light, her jeans fitting just right, and she asked if I ever did side work. I shrugged, said yes, and that's how I ended up taking care of her yard every Saturday morning. At first, it was nothing more than that. A neighbor helping a neighbor a little extra cash. A routine that gave me something to do. But routines have a way of changing when someone like her is involved. Her name is Eleanor Brooks. 50 years old, though you'd never guess it by looking at her. She has that kind of beauty that makes you wonder how many stories are hidden behind her eyes. Every time I worked on her lawn, I'd catch glimpses of her, watering her plants, carrying groceries, or sometimes just sitting on the porch with a book. She'd wave, sometimes call out a quick hello, and I'd nod back, pretending I wasn't thrown off by how easily she seemed to fill the space around her. That day, though, was different. I'd been mowing longer than usual, trying to distract myself from the gnawing thoughts that had been following me lately. Loneliness mostly creeps in after divorce. Even when you think you've moved on, the mower droned on, drowning out everything else until I saw her. Eleanor Brooks walking toward me. She wore a plain white top and sunglasses, casual, but to me, she might as well have stepped off the cover of a magazine. She stopped near the porch, folded her arms, and just watched me for a moment. When I finally cut the engine, she smiled in that soft but knowing way of hers. "You work too hard," she said. Her voice wasn't teasing, but it had a warmth to it that made my chest tighten. I wiped the sweat from my forehead, trying to come up with a clever reply. But before I could, she tilted her head slightly and added, "Why don't you come inside after work?" I froze. The words hung there between us, heavier than they should have been. She might have meant a glass of water, maybe just a seat in the shade, but my mind spun in a dozen directions at once. Was she lonely, too? Was it just kindness or something else? I couldn't tell, and the not knowing was worse than anything. I nodded slowly, trying not to show how rattled I felt. "Sure," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. She smiled again as if satisfied and turned back toward her house. I stood there for a few seconds longer, staring at the closed door, the mower silent at my side, my heart beating harder than it should have. That moment replayed in my head for the rest of the day, louder than the sound of the mower, sharper than the smell of cut grass. What did she mean? And why me of all people? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing. Nothing about my Saturdays was going to feel the same anymore. When I finally finished mowing that day, I stood by the mower longer than I needed to, staring at her front door. My shirt clung to my back. My hands smelled like grass and sweat, and my heart refused to slow down. It wasn't just her words echoing in my head. It was the way she'd said them, like she knew something I didn't. I wiped my hands on my jeans, took a deep breath, and walked toward her porch. The door opened before I could knock. Eleanor Brooks stood there, framed by the soft glow of her hallway light. She had changed into a light blue blouse, her hair brushed, her glasses perched neatly on her nose. "Come in," she said simply, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Inside her house was everything I didn't expect. Warm, tidy, filled with books and photographs that made me stop and look. On the mantel above her fireplace was a framed picture of her with a man. Her ex-husband, I assumed, smiling stiffly in what looked like better years. My chest tightened. This was her space, her life, and I was suddenly aware of how much of an outsider I really was. She must have noticed my hesitation because she gave a small laugh. "Don't worry, I don't bite. Sit down." "Coffee?" I nodded, sitting awkwardly on the edge of her couch while she moved into the kitchen. The smell of fresh coffee drifted into the room, comforting in a way I hadn't realized I missed. She came back with 2 cups, set one in front of me, and sat across from me. For a while, we just sipped in silence. Finally, she broke it. "I know what you're thinking. Why invite the lawn guy in, right?" Her eyes were sharp behind her glasses, but her smile softened the words. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged. "I figured you were being nice. Maybe, but maybe I just wanted someone to talk to," she said, her voice quieter now. "It gets lonely sometimes." Those words hit harder than I expected because I understood. I'd spent the last 2 years pretending I was fine, that I liked the silence of my empty house, the freedom of making my own choices. But the truth was, the silence was heavier than I could handle most days. I leaned back, letting her words settle between us. "Yeah," I admitted. "I know what you mean." Her eyes lingered on me for a moment, like she was searching for something. Then she nodded almost to herself and changed the subject. She asked about my work, my life, and I found myself talking more than I planned to. About my divorce, about the job I hated but couldn't leave, about how strange it felt to be almost 40 and starting over. She listened, really listened, in a way that made me feel lighter. In return, she told me little pieces of her story. She'd been married for 20 years before it fell apart. She had a grown daughter who lived across the country. She loved gardening but hated cooking, preferred wine to beer, and couldn't sleep if the house was too quiet. None of it was earth-shattering, but it felt like opening doors to rooms I hadn't known existed. The clock ticked past 7 and I realized I'd been sitting there for over an hour. I stood reluctantly, not wanting the moment to end. "I should go," I said. She walked me to the door. As I reached for the handle, she stopped me with a soft, almost hesitant voice. "Noah Carter, thanks for coming in. It meant more than you know." I turned to look at her. She was smiling, but there was something fragile in her eyes, something unspoken that made me pause. I wanted to ask what she meant, but instead I just nodded. "Anytime," I said. I stepped out into the evening air, the smell of cut grass still clinging to me. As I walked back to my house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. It was still her house, her life. But now, somehow, I was part of it. And the strangest thing, for the first time in years, I didn't feel quite so alone. I didn't expect it to become a routine. But a few days later, I was out mowing again. And there she was, standing on her porch, waving like we'd been neighbors for years instead of people who had just crossed some invisible line. She called out, "Don't work too hard. I made too much coffee." Again, it was casual, lighthearted. But the way she said it made me feel like I'd been invited into a secret that belonged only to us. That became the pattern. I'd finish mowing, sweaty and tired, and she'd open her door like she'd been waiting. Sometimes it was coffee, sometimes iced tea, sometimes just a quiet conversation on her porch as the sun went down. With each meeting, the silence between us grew more comfortable yet more charged. One evening, I noticed the way the late light caught in her hair, turning it gold against her shoulders. She was wearing a simple white shirt and jeans. Nothing fancy, but I couldn't look away. She laughed at something I said, a real laugh that lit up her face. And for a moment, I forgot to breathe. She must have noticed because her smile softened. "You have kind eyes, Noah Carter," she said suddenly, as if she hadn't meant to say it out loud. I shifted uncomfortably, not knowing how to respond. Compliments weren't something I was used to anymore, but the sincerity in her voice made me feel seen in a way I hadn't for a long time. That night, she told me about her daughter. "Her name's Sophie Miller," she said, showing me a picture on her phone. A young woman with her mother's eyes standing in front of a college campus. Pride and longing flickered across Eleanor Brooks's face. "She's doing well, but I miss her every day." I nodded, not sure what to say. I thought about my own empty house, about the family I once thought I'd have, but never did. "Sounds like you did a good job," I said quietly. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, there was a heaviness there, as if she wanted to tell me more. But instead, she just smiled and changed the subject. It was late when I finally stood to leave. The air was cool, crickets humming in the grass. As I reached the edge of her porch, she said something that stopped me. You don't always have to wait until you're done mowing to come by. My door's open. The words hung in the air, simple but layered. Was she inviting me in as a friend or something more? Couldn't tell. And maybe I didn't want to know just yet. The next few days, I caught myself looking toward her house more often than I wanted to admit. When I saw her in the yard pulling weeds or watering flowers, I'd wave and she'd wave back, her smile tugging at something inside me. But not everything felt easy. One afternoon, as I was trimming the hedge near the street, a man pulled up in a black car. He stepped out, tall, confident, maybe a few years older than me. He walked straight to her porch, knocked, and she opened the door with a surprised expression. I pretended to keep working, but my chest tightened. They talked for a while, his voice low, hers sharp at times. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught fragments. Not a good time. We agreed. Just leave it. Finally, she stepped outside, crossed her arms, and stood her ground until he shook his head and walked back to his car. When he left, she glanced toward me. Our eyes met, and for a second, I saw something raw in hers. Anger, fear, maybe both. She gave me a small wave, forced, and went back inside. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Who was he? Ex-husband? Someone else? The thought of him being part of her life unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. But the next evening when she called me over again, she acted as if nothing had happened. We sat at her kitchen table, the light low, and she asked about my week like she genuinely wanted to know. I wanted to press her about the man, but I couldn't bring myself to. Not yet. Instead, we talked until the clock pushed past midnight. And when I finally left, I realized something had changed. I wasn't just a neighbor anymore, and she wasn't just a woman who offered me coffee. There was a pull now, something unspoken between us. And though I didn't know where it was heading, I knew one thing for certain. I was already too deep to turn back. I couldn't shake the image of that man on her porch. The way she folded her arms, the tension in her jaw, the sharp words I caught on the wind. It replayed in my mind for days. I told myself it wasn't my business, that I had no claim on her life beyond the grass I cut, the coffee we shared. But the truth was clear. I was already entangled. A week later, the tension broke. I was in her backyard helping move heavy flower pots when I heard footsteps on the gravel drive. I turned and there he was, the man in the black car. He didn't look surprised to see me. He looked amused, like he'd already decided what I was. "Well, Eleanor Brooks," he said, his voice smooth but sharp at the edges. "I see you found yourself some company." She stiffened beside me, her hand brushing dirt from her jeans. "William Hayes, this isn't the time." "Isn't the time?" His gaze shifted to me, lingering with an almost mocking smile. "Looks like I showed up too late. You've already replaced me." I clenched my fists but said nothing. I wasn't about to fight in her yard like some schoolboy, but the way he looked at her, then at me, was enough to make my blood heat. Eleanor Brooks's voice cut through the tension. "You need to leave," William Hayes smirked. "We'll talk later. You can't avoid me forever." He gave me one last glance as if to say I didn't belong, then walked back to his car. The silence he left behind was thick. Eleanor Brooks sighed, pressing her hand to her forehead. "I'm sorry you had to see that." I hesitated before asking, "Who is he?" Her eyes lingered on the ground before meeting mine. "My ex-husband. He doesn't understand that it's over. He shows up whenever he feels like it, trying to remind me of what I left behind." I nodded slowly, the puzzle pieces fitting into place. "Does he ever?" I stopped myself. I didn't want to push, but the thought of her being hurt gnawed at me. She shook her head, reading the unspoken question. "No, just words. But he knows how to make them cut deep." That night, over another pot of coffee, she told me more about the years she spent married to a man who made her feel small, invisible. About the silence that grew between them until it became unbearable. About the courage it took to finally walk away. Her voice trembled only once when she admitted, Sometimes I wonder if I made a mistake, not because I miss him, but because I don't know if I deserve something better. I wanted to tell her right then that she did, that she deserved more than better. She deserved someone who saw her, who valued the way she laughed, the way her eyes softened when she talked about her daughter, the strength it took just to start again. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I said softly, "He doesn't get to decide your worth." For a moment, she just looked at me, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled, a small, fragile thing. "You always know how to say the right thing, Noah Carter." But even as she smiled, I could sense the weight pressing on her, and I knew William Hayes wasn't finished. The following weekend, my prediction came true. I was back at her house trimming the edge of the lawn when I saw his car parked across the street. He didn't come to the door this time. He just sat there, engine idling, watching. When Eleanor Brooks noticed, her face palled. She tried to hide it, tried to act as though nothing was wrong. But her hands shook as she poured me a glass of water. "Ignore him," she whispered. "That's what I do." But I couldn't. Every instinct in me screamed that this wasn't right. She shouldn't have to live with shadows at her door, with eyes following her every move. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something had shifted. This wasn't just about quiet evenings over coffee anymore. This was about protecting her, about standing beside her when someone else wanted to tear her down. I didn't know exactly what was coming next, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever line I thought I hadn't crossed, I was already far past it, and there was no turning back. The day it came to a head was warmer than it should have been. The kind of afternoon where the air pressed down on your shoulders, and even the birds seemed quieter than usual. I was trimming the hedges by Eleanor Brooks's porch when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. My chest tightened before I even turned. I knew it was him. William Hayes stepped out of the car with that same confident stride as though the world still belonged to him. His eyes flicked from me to Eleanor Brooks, who had just stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on a towel. "Still here?" he muttered, glaring at me. "Guess you've made yourself comfortable." Eleanor Brooks's voice was steady, but I could see the tremor in her hand as she held the towel. "William Hayes, go home." "Home?" he scoffed. "You were my home, Eleanor Brooks. This house, this life, it was ours. And now you've let him take my place." He jabbed a finger in my direction. Some hired hand with a lawnmower. I felt the words hit, but I didn't flinch. It wasn't worth giving him that satisfaction. Instead, I looked at Eleanor Brooks. This wasn't about me. It was about her finally breaking free of the grip. He still tried to hold over her. She drew in a breath, her chin lifting. "You lost your place the moment you stopped seeing me. The moment you stopped listening. This isn't about him, William Hayes. This is about me choosing my life again." For a moment, the silence stretched heavy and raw. William Hayes's face twisted, then hardened. Without another word, he turned, climbed into his car, and drove off, the sound of his engine fading into the distance. Eleanor Brooks dropped the towel onto the porch rail and sank onto the steps. I set down the trimmer and joined her, unsure if I should speak. The weight of her silence was louder than anything I could have said. Finally, she looked at me, her eyes glassy, but unbroken. "I've been waiting years to say those words. I didn't know if I'd ever be strong enough." "You were more than strong," I told her. "You were brave." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "You think so?" "I know." So the quiet between us shifted then. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was light, fragile, like something just beginning to take shape. She reached for her coffee mug on the step beside her. But instead of sipping it, she held it in her hands, staring at the steam as if gathering courage. "You've been here more than anyone else these last few months," she said softly, helping with the lawn, the garden. "But more than that, you've listened. You've seen me." I'd almost forgotten what that felt like. Her voice caught on the last words, and instinctively, I placed my hand over hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she looked up, meeting my eyes with a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. "I'm scared," she whispered, scared to trust again. Scared that maybe I don't deserve this. "Or you," I shook my head. the words coming easier now than I ever expected. You deserve someone who shows up, who stays, who wants you for exactly who you are. And if you'll let me, I want to be that man. Her breath caught, and for a moment, I wondered if I'd gone too far. But then her hand tightened around mine, firm and certain. You already are. The sun dipped lower, spilling gold across the yard, catching in her hair, turning it into strands of fire. We sat there together on the porch steps. No grand declarations, no promises we couldn't keep, just the quiet understanding that something had shifted, that this was the start of something real. Later, as I walked home under the fading light, I thought about how ordinary the day had begun. Just another lawn, another Saturday. But it ended with a truth I hadn't seen coming. Sometimes the simplest invitation, a cup of coffee, a few shared hours can unravel the walls built by years of silence. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it can change the course of two lives forever.